If you'd like to expand your collection of alpine plants, then you're in luck because many alpine plants are really easy to propagate. I'm going to show you how to expand your alpine plant collection for free. Herbaceous alpines, such as this Campanula, are really easy to divide. It's also good for the plant to help it to grow more effectively, to split those clumps apart, and also it's preventing it from taking over a section of the rock garden when often space can be a bit limited. The ideal time of year to be doing this is early spring. And what I'm going to do is I'm going to dig around the edge of the clump to minimise the root disturbance and lift up the entire clump. Once I've got it up, I will either, if it comes apart easily, divide it by hand, or if there's a bit more resistance with the roots, I can get 2 hand forks back to back and use the forks to prise those sections apart. Once I've got my clumps that I'm ready to work with, then I can dig some new holes for them and replant those plants. So now I've got my new plants and I'm going to plant them. I've dug a hole, and because the ground here, we've got a lot of this rock mulch that we've added, which is wonderful for drainage, but just to help the plant establish. Once I put it in, I'm going to add some organic matter, which will help the plant to establish. So this mix is our John Innes No. 2 with some added grit. And then the final thing I need to do is just give them a good watering. And there we are. So as you can see, really quite easy to divide these plants. If you want to do this yourself, just double check that the plant that you're going to divide is the right sort of thing that will like division. There are other alpine plants, such as the pulsatillas, that have really long taproots and they will not like being divided in this way. So always double check before you start splitting your plants. So some alpines are particularly helpful and do the work for you and produce offsets or little baby plants. A really good example of that is a Sempervivum, and I have one here. You can see how we've got this lovely big mother rosette, and each of these little stalks coming off of it holds a small little baby rosette, which are just all ready to become separate new plants of their own. You can see this smaller rosette here to one side. That would have been a little offset baby like this at one point, but it's now rooted fully and has become its own small plant. If I wanted, I could take this smaller rosette out of the pot it up separately, and I would have a whole new Sempervivum plant. But today what I'm going to do is just remove each of the small offsets, pot them up, and then we'll have the beginnings of some new Sempervivum plants. So I have my pre-prepared pot of potting mix here. It's a mixture of John Innes No. 2 with some added grit. I'm going to remove the stalk or stolon at the base of the mother plant here. The plant, when it roots, will actually root from here at the base of the rosette, but this will help stabilize the baby plant once it's in the pot. Once I've cut it off, I will remove these extra leaves down here, as if they go in and touch the growing media, they will rot, so I don't really want them there. Now I'm just going to use my tweezers to make a small hole. I can just take the plant, place that in my tweezers and bring it down into the hole. And then I just repeat the same process a couple of times. My final step is to give these plants a good water. And the way I'm going to do it is to water over the top of the pot, as this will help settle the compost and bed in those little baby plants. Now, to make sure the water doesn't come out in too much of a rush, I'm going to start the flow away from the pot, then I'm going to cross over it a few times. All I need to do now is to make sure that I keep this pot nice and moist until those little plants have established themselves. To avoid any confusion later, I always label anything that I propagate. The best time to be doing this is in the spring, when the offsets first appear. You want to get them in and potted up before it starts to get too hot in the summer, and it gives them plenty of time to establish before the winter dormancy sets in. A great way to get some more free plants is to propagate through cuttings. So some alpine plants, it's the best way to actually propagate them, such as this cushion plant, a Saxifraga. The best time of year to be doing this would either be in the spring or the autumn, just when it's a bit cooler, and so it gives the plant time to establish and put down some roots before it gets too hot. A good rule of thumb is to water any plant that you're planning to take cuttings from the day before you take those cuttings. We want the plant to be really nice and hydrated, as it will help those cuttings to survive once we actually take them. So what I'm going to do is try and find one from down here at the bottom where it won't cause too much of a gap. I want to cut as long a stem as I can, but I need to be careful that I don't cut too far into the centre of the plant, because I don't want to damage too many. So actually I've got a double header here. This piece here is just branched out just above where I made the cut. So I've actually got 2 branches so I can make 2 good cuttings. I'm going to work with this smaller one first. It's important that I remove any of these excess leaves down the stem. If I leave too many on, the plant will transpire more, it'll use up more water, and it'll dry out the cutting faster. The other reason is that if I leave leaves down the stem and then when I put it into the sand, the leaves will rot and then the whole cutting could die. So because I'm going to plant this cutting pretty much straight away, I don't need to put it in a plastic bag or anything to keep it fresh. If I was taking cuttings from out and about in the garden, then that would be a really great idea to make sure that they don't dry out. I've got my 3 cuttings, so now I'm ready to sow them in my sand tray. It's important when I sow them that they go into an inorganic media. This will help make sure that they don't rot off. If I plant them into compost, they're more likely to rot. I'm going to use sand as my inorganic media, and I need to make sure that it's nice and damp before I start. Normally on a tray this size, I could fit in maybe 10 or 12 different cuttings, but I'm just going to do the 3 today. The way I'm going to hold them is I'm going to grip the bottom so that I can use this part of the tweezer to poke the cutting in and make a hole as I go. I now need to give these a good drink, and I'm going to water this until the sand is saturated, and that will help ensure that the cutting has nice, good contact with the sand around it. If you don't have a sprayer like this, that's fine. You can use a watering can with a fine rose. Now they've had a good water, I'm going to pop this tray somewhere out of the direct sun. I'm going to make sure to keep the sand moist, and within at least a couple of weeks, but probably for these cuttings a bit more like 2 months, the roots will start to develop. In order to check, what I'll do is I'll just ease one out of the sand and have a look. The moment those roots have developed, I need to get them out of the sand and into some organic matter so that they have some food to help them grow and thrive. It's really exciting to grow your own plants from seed, and I'm going to show you how to collect seed from a couple of different alpine plants and how to sow it and get it to germinate. If you're going to do this for yourself, please make sure that you research the specific needs of the alpine seed that you're sowing, as they can vary quite a lot between the different plants. You need to think about things like what depth does the seed need to be sown at, what temperature does it need to thrive, and how much water and moisture and light do you need to give it. By making sure that you get all of these things balanced in the way that this particular seed needs, you're giving it its best chance to germinate, to grow and to thrive. So let's look at this plant first. This is a Massonia, and as you can see, it's now gone dormant. Now, this plant was in its growing season and looking beautiful back in the winter, and it's produced seed which we need to collect now and store. Because what a Massonia seed really likes is to have a change in temperature between warmth and cool. So the best time to sow it would be at the end of August, because at this point it's still warm during the day, but the nights will start getting cooler. And this change between the warmth and the cool is what the Massonia seeds need to break their dormancy and to germinate effectively. So for these seeds, it's really important to sow them at the right time, but obviously now's the moment to collect them. I've got my tray here so that I can, if the seed pings out at a funny angle, it won't matter, the tray will catch it. There we go, we've got these little black balls here. that's the seed that I'm looking to collect. Okay, now that I've removed all of the chaff, what I'm left with is just the little black seeds there. I'm just going to pop these in this bag for storage. So these seeds need to be stored so that they stay cool and dry. And now they're all safely ready, packaged up for when I come to sow them at the end of August. In contrast to our Massonia, this Hepatica, which is more of a woodland plant, the way that we treat the seeds for this plant is quite different. The seeds here are actually green and slightly fleshy. These seeds will start to deteriorate the moment that they're taken off the plant. So we need to sow them as soon as they've been harvested. I'll know if the Hepatica seed is ready to come or not, because when I touch it and knock it, the seeds should just fall straight off. So let's see if that happens. Yep, there they go. So I've got my seeds here in the tray, and here I've got my little pot of potting mix. I have my organic material in there, and I've added in some grit to make sure that it has really good drainage. So I'm just going to grab the seeds and then pop them there on top of the potting mix. So next step, I'm going to add a layer of gravel to the top over the seeds. It will help ensure that the seeds have good contact with the soil. It will also act as a barrier to help retain moisture, and it acts as a weed suppressant, so we won't get a horrible mossy top growing on the top of the pot. The last thing I need to do is give them a good watering in. With Hepatica seed, it can take quite a while before germination actually happens. Unlike the Massonia that we talked about earlier, where it needs that change from warmth to cool, back to warm, back to cool with overnight change in temperatures in order to break its dormancy and to germinate, with the Hepatica seeds, what they'll want is a prolonged period of cold. So they need to be outside over the winter so they get that freezing period. So what I'll do is store this outside. I'll make sure that the pot doesn't dry out completely, so I'll water it a little bit now and again. However, it may be that I won't get germination next year and I'll have to wait a whole nother year. So I'll just carry on keeping that pot moist, keep it outside, and fingers crossed the following spring, that's when they'll germinate. When it comes to propagating bulbs, it can actually be really quite straightforward, as lots of bulbs will produce little offsets or little baby bulbs at their base. All you need to do is separate out these smaller bulbs, pop them up separately and grow them on. Now I think there might be a few smaller bulbs in this pot of Narcissus. Let's tip it out and see what we've got. As you can see, there's a lovely number of bulbs in this pot. We've got lots and lots here that will be producing lots of beautiful flowers for us come next January. I can see that some of them have already produced smaller bulbs, smaller offset bulbs. What I want to make sure is that if I try to remove a smaller bulb from its parent, it needs to have its own basal plate. So the basal plate of a bulb is this area just on the bottom. The roots don't matter so much because they will die away and then regrow in the autumn. But the basal plate, any bulb must have its own basal plate or it won't be able to survive. What I can do now is take out the slightly smaller bulbs that are ready to be separated from the parent bulb and pot them up, and then that will help me produce more and more bulbs, more and more plants for it, so I get a beautiful display come the winter. With this particular species of Narcissus, the smaller bulblets are actually still quite large compared to the parent bulb, so we might get a flower out of them that bit sooner. But you may find that with any bulbs that you try to separate offsets from, that the bulb is large and the offsets are much smaller. That's absolutely fine. It just may take a little longer for those smaller baby bulblets to grow and produce flowers. It's also worth mentioning that another method of propagation for bulbs that some people will use is called chipping. So what you would do if you were going to chip a bulb is you would actually cut it with a really, really fine blade, like a razor blade, and actually chopping the bulb through the basal plate into sections. These sections would then produce little bulblets. However, it's quite a specialised process and you really do need to know what you're doing. It's very easy to make the cut incorrectly and then the bulb will just rot off and die. So if chipping is something that you're interested in trying, then make sure you research it thoroughly, get some guidance and be really clear on what you're doing before you start chopping up your bulbs. We hope you've enjoyed our series on alpines and that you will be inspired to raise some of your favourite plants yourself.